Montana Territory, 1871. The cold crept beneath Victor Miller's collar as he pushed open the door of his barn, lantern raised against the gathering darkness of the autumn evening. A gust of wind tore at his coat, and with it came the sound, a child's voice, high and desperate. "Sir, she's too weak to beg." Victor spun around, nearly dropping his lantern. A girl of no more than 10 stood at the edge of his property, her calico dress muddied and torn, her face pale with exhaustion. Behind her, the empty road stretched back toward the nearest town, 15 miles of rugged terrain that no child should have traversed alone. "What in God's name are you doing out here, child?" Victor asked, striding toward her. "Where are your folks?" "Please, sir," she said, pointing toward the barn with a shaking hand. "I didn't know what to do. She fell from the wagon yesterday. We were traveling, and—" tears choked off her words. "She's too weak to beg for help herself." Victor looked back toward his barn, his pulse quickening. He hadn't checked the far stalls when he'd gone in to light the lantern. Without another word, he hurried toward the building, the girl following at his heels. There, collapsed on a makeshift bed of hay in the farthest corner, lay a young woman. Her face was flushed with fever, her breathing shallow. Dark hair spilled across the straw, and one arm was bound in a crude splint. "She said we shouldn't trespass," the girl whispered behind him. "But I didn't know what else to do when she couldn't walk anymore." "You did right," Victor said, kneeling beside the woman. Her eyelids fluttered at his approach, but didn't open. "How long has she been like this?" "Since last night. I tried to give her water, but she keeps getting hotter." Victor placed a hand on the woman's forehead and cursed under his breath. "What's your name, little one?" "Sarah," the girl replied. "And that's my sister, Rose Zimmerman." "Well, Sarah, I'm Victor Miller. We need to get your sister into the house." He gently slid his arms beneath Rose's shoulders and knees. "Can you bring the lantern?" The girl nodded, grabbing the light with determined hands. As Victor lifted Rose, she moaned softly, her head rolling against his shoulder. Even through the fever's heat, he could feel how thin she was, as if she'd been without proper food for weeks. The realization stirred something protective in him, something he hadn't felt in the 3 years since he'd buried his wife and infant son. The walk to the house was short, but difficult, with Rose's limp form in his arms and the wind slicing through his coat. Inside, the cabin was spare but clean. Victor had built it with his own hands after coming west, determined to leave behind the memories of Philadelphia and the cholera that had stolen his family. The main room contained a table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, and little else. A door led to his bedroom, the only other room in the house. "We'll put her in my bed," Victor said, pushing the bedroom door open with his foot. "Sarah, there's a kettle on the stove. See if you can get it filled with water from the pump outside." The girl hesitated. "Will my sister be all right?" Victor looked down at Rose's face, her features delicate despite the fever's flush. "I'll do everything I can," he promised. After laying Rose on the bed, Victor worked quickly to build up the fire in the main room's hearth. By the time Sarah returned with the water, he had found clean cloths, a bottle of whiskey, and the medicine kit he kept for emergencies. "I need to see that arm," he told Sarah as he sat on the edge of the bed. "Do you know how she hurt it?" Sarah's small face crumpled. "The men who robbed us pushed her down when she tried to stop them. That was 3 days ago, on the road from Bozeman." Victor's jaw tightened as he carefully unwrapped the makeshift splint, strips of torn petticoat around 2 thin branches. "You've been traveling alone since then?" "We were going to Helena. Rose has a job waiting there, teaching at the new school." The girl watched anxiously as Victor examined her sister's swollen forearm. "The robbers took our horse, our money, everything except what was in Rose's satchel. It's broken, but it's a clean break," Victor said, probing gently. "I'll need to set it properly." He looked up at the girl. "Sarah, this will hurt your sister. You might want to wait in the other room." Sarah lifted her chin. "I won't leave her." Victor nodded, respecting the child's courage. He soaked a cloth in cool water and placed it on Rose's forehead, then took a deep breath and focused on the task at hand. With a swift, practiced movement, he'd set his share of broken bones during the war. He pulled the arm straight, aligning the broken bone. Rose's eyes flew open, a scream tearing from her throat. She thrashed against Victor's hold, disoriented and terrified. "Rose," Sarah cried, grabbing her sister's good hand. "It's all right. He's helping us." "Easy now," Victor said, his voice low and steady as he held the arm in position. I know it hurts, but I've got to set this properly. Rose's eyes, a startling shade of green despite the glaze of fever, fixed on his face. Who? She gasped. Victor Miller. You're on my ranch, about 15 miles west of Cottonwood Creek. He continued working as he spoke, wrapping the arm with clean bandages and splinting it with pieces of kindling he'd cut to size. Your sister brought me to you. Brave little thing walked right up to my door. Rose's gaze shifted to Sarah, momentary clarity breaking through the fever. You promised to stay hidden, she whispered. I had to get help, Sarah said stubbornly. You couldn't walk anymore. Rose tried to sit up, but Victor gently pressed her back against the pillows. You need to rest, Miss Zimmerman. You've got a nasty fever, and that arm needs time to heal. We can't. She closed her eyes, swallowing hard. We have nothing to pay you with. The coach to Helena leaves in 3 days, and we must be on it. Victor shook his head. You're not going anywhere for at least a week, maybe longer. He finished securing the splint and reached for the bottle of willow bark tincture. Here, this will help with the pain and fever. Rose turned her face away. Please, Mr. Miller. We cannot be a burden. The position in Helena, it's all we have left. Rose, Sarah said, her voice small. You can't even stand up. Victor measured out a dose of the medicine. Listen to your sister, Miss Zimmerman. Whatever awaits you in Helena can wait a few more days. Right now, you need to focus on getting well. He held the spoon to her lips. Take this, then rest. We can argue about your departure when you're not burning with fever. After a moment of hesitation, Rose accepted the medicine, grimacing at its bitterness. Within minutes, her eyelids grew heavy, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep. Victor turned to Sarah, noting the dark circles under the child's eyes. When did you last eat, Sarah? The girl shrugged. Yesterday morning. We had some bread, but it's gone now. Victor felt a surge of anger at whoever had left these two to fend for themselves on the dangerous Montana roads. Come on, he said, rising from the bedside. Let's get some food in you while your sister rests. In the main room, Victor prepared a simple meal of salt pork, beans, and the last of his biscuits. As Sarah ate with the desperate focus of the truly hungry, he considered his unexpected guests. The girl couldn't be more than 10, and Rose, despite her obvious determination, looked barely old enough to be teaching school. What had driven them to make such a journey alone? Where are your parents, Sarah? He asked gently. Sarah paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. They died last winter. Influenza. I'm sorry to hear that. Rose took care of everything after. She sold our parents' farm in Minnesota and got the teaching position in Helena. Sarah's chin trembled slightly. She said we'd make a new start out west. Victor nodded, understanding all too well the allure of a fresh beginning in this vast territory. And you were nearly there. Those men took everything, Sarah whispered. Rose tried to fight them, but there were 3 of them. Her small hands clenched into fists. I was hiding in the back of the wagon. Rose told me to stay hidden, no matter what happened. Your sister is very brave, Victor said. And so are you. Sarah looked up, her eyes suddenly fierce. Are you going to make us leave as soon as Rose can walk? Victor considered the question. Winter was approaching fast in the mountains. His nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and town was even further. The 2 sisters had no money, no transportation, and Rose would need weeks to recover properly. No, he said finally. You can stay until your sister is well enough to travel safely, and we figure out what to do about Helena. Relief washed over the child's face. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Victor, he corrected. If we're sharing a roof, you might as well use my given name. For the first time since she'd appeared at his barn, Sarah smiled. Rose drifted in and out of consciousness through the night. Victor sat beside the bed, changing the cool cloths on her forehead and coaxing water between her lips whenever she stirred. Sarah had fallen asleep in Victor's chair near the fire, wrapped in a quilt he'd pulled from a trunk. As dawn approached, Rose's fever finally broke. Victor was dozing in the chair he'd pulled to the bedside when her voice, weak but clear, woke him. Mr. Miller? He straightened, rubbing sleep from his eyes. You're awake. Rose's face was pale, but no longer flushed with fever. How long have I been here? Just one night, Victor replied. You were in a bad way when your sister found me. Rose's eyes darted around the room. Sarah is fine, sleeping by the fire. Victor leaned forward. She's an extraordinary girl. Walked miles to find help for you. A shadow crossed Rose's face. She shouldn't have had to. I was supposed to protect her. She attempted to sit up, wincing as the movement jarred her broken arm. Easy, Victor cautioned. That arm will take weeks to heal properly. Weeks? Alarm flashed in Rose's eyes. I cannot stay here for weeks, Mr. Miller. I have obligations in Helena. A position waiting, I understand, Victor said, though privately he doubted any school would expect a woman to teach with an untreated broken arm and recovering from fever. But pushing yourself too hard now will only delay your recovery. Rose sank back against the pillows, frustration evident in the set of her jaw. For the first time, Victor took a proper look at her. Without the distortion of fever, he could see she was older than he'd first thought, perhaps 23 or 24. Her features were striking rather than conventionally pretty. High cheekbones, a determined chin, and those remarkable green eyes that now regarded him warily. I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Miller, but I must ask, what do you expect in return for this assistance? The question caught him off guard. Nothing. You needed help. I gave it. Rose's expression remained guarded. In my experience, Mr. Miller, men rarely offer assistance to women without expecting something in return. Victor felt a flash of indignation, quickly tempered by understanding. A woman traveling alone with a child would have reason to be cautious. Miss Zimmerman, I expect nothing from you except that you rest and recover. When you're well enough to travel, I'll help you get to Helena. He stood up. Now, you should eat something. I'll bring you some broth. As Victor moved toward the door, Rose's voice stopped him. Forgive my suspicion, Mr. Miller. It has been a difficult journey. He turned back. Out here, we help our neighbors, even the ones we've just met. For the first time, Rose's expression softened. Then I thank you, neighbor. The days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Victor continued his ranch work, caring for his small herd of cattle, repairing fences damaged by early autumn storms, and preparing for the coming winter. Each morning, he checked on Rose before heading out, and each evening, he returned to find her a little stronger. Sarah proved herself useful, eager to help with cooking and household tasks in return for their shelter. She followed Victor around the ranch whenever he allowed it, curious about everything from how he broke the horses to why he chose Montana territory over more settled lands. My husband thought to try ranching in Texas, she told him one afternoon as they gathered eggs from the chicken coop. But Rose said Montana would be better, less crowded. Victor nearly dropped the basket of eggs. Your husband? Sarah giggled, a sound so carefree it startled them both. That's what Rose told people on the journey. She said a woman and child traveling alone invite trouble, but a widow with her daughter would be respected. Her smile faded. It didn't work with those robbers, though. Victor shook his head, impressed by Rose's foresight even as he worried about what other dangers the sisters might have faced. Your sister is a clever woman. She wanted to be a doctor, Sarah confided. But Papa said that wasn't proper for a lady. So she became a teacher instead. The information settled in Victor's mind alongside other observations he'd made. The careful way Rose handled his medical supplies when changing her own bandages, her knowledge of which herbs helped reduce inflammation, the medical textbook she'd pulled from her salvage satchel to read during her convalescence. By the end of the first week, Rose was able to move around the cabin, though the broken arm continued to pain her. She insisted on helping with meals, awkwardly chopping vegetables one-handed, while Victor pretended not to notice when she paused to catch her breath. You should be resting, he told her one evening as she struggled to set the table with her good arm. I have rested enough, she replied firmly. I cannot repay your kindness by being a burden. You're not a burden, Victor said, taking the plates from her hand. And there's nothing to repay. Rose looked up at him, a strand of dark hair falling across her face. There is always something to repay, Mr. Miller. I learned that lesson early. Before Victor could respond, Sarah burst through the door, her face alight with excitement. Victor says I can help name the new foal when it comes, she announced. The mare's going to foal any day now, Rose. Can I show you tomorrow? Rose smiled at her sister's enthusiasm. If Mr. Miller doesn't mind, I'd like that. Of course I don't mind, Victor said, surprised by how much he meant it. His ranch had been a solitary place for so long that the presence of these two had transformed it in ways he hadn't anticipated. The cabin felt warmer somehow, filled with conversation and small domestic sounds that had been absent since Martha's death. That night, After Sarah had gone to bed in the small pallet they'd arranged near the fireplace, Victor and Rose sat at the table, a cup of coffee between them. The lamplight cast a warm glow over Rose's features as she carefully unwrapped her splint for the evening check she insisted on performing. "It's healing well," Victor observed, watching her clinical examination of the swelling. "Yes." Rose rewrapped the bandages with practiced movements. "Another 3 weeks, and I should have reasonable use of it again." Victor hesitated, then voiced the question that had been on his mind. "The school and Helena, will they hold your position?" Rose's hand stilled. "I don't know. The term was to begin last week." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "I should write to them, explain the circumstances. I'll take a letter to town when I go for supplies next week," Victor offered. "Thank you." Rose traced the rim of her coffee cup. "Mr. Miller." "Victor," he corrected. "After all this time, I think you can use my given name." A faint smile curved her lips. "Victor, what I wanted to ask is, why are you alone out here? A man with your skills and resources could have settled closer to town, had neighbors, perhaps even a family." The question struck close to the grief he kept carefully contained. Victor took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "I had a family once. In Philadelphia. My wife, Martha, and our son, James." The names felt strange on his tongue after so long. "They died of cholera in '68. Rose's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry. After that, I couldn't bear to stay in the city. Everything reminded me of them." Victor stared into the fire. "I came west because I needed open spaces, work that would exhaust me, and few reminders of what I'd lost." "And have you found peace here?" Rose asked quietly. Victor considered the question. "Not peace exactly, but purpose. The land demands attention. The animals need care. There's always something that must be done, regardless of how I feel about doing it." He looked at her. "What about you?" "Teaching school in Helena seems a solitary path for a young woman." "It's the only respectable profession open to me," Rose replied. "And with Sarah to raise." She trailed off, her gaze distant. "After our parents died, there were those in our town who suggested splitting us up. Sarah to an orphanage, me to a position as a companion to an elderly woman." Her jaw set firmly. "I refuse to be separated from her. If that means teaching in remote territories for the rest of my days, so be it." Victor admired her determination. "She's fortunate to have you." "We're fortunate to have found you," Rose said softly. "Not many would have taken in strangers as you did." Something shifted in the air between them, an acknowledgement of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together, and perhaps something more. Victor found himself noticing the graceful line of her neck, the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in her slender hands. Abruptly, he stood up. "It's getting late. You should rest." Rose looked startled by his sudden movement, but nodded. "Of course. Good night, Victor." "Good night, Miss Zimmerman." "Rose," she corrected, with the ghost of a smile. "After all this time, I think you can use my given name." The following days brought unseasonably warm weather, a last reprieve before winter set in. Victor took advantage of it to show Rose and Sarah around the ranch, pleased by their interest in what he'd built. Rose, still moving carefully but stronger each day, asked thoughtful questions about his cattle operation, water management, and plans for expansion. "You've accomplished a great deal on your own," she remarked as they stood on a rise overlooking the pastures where his small herd grazed. "Not entirely on my own," Victor admitted. "I hire hands during calving season and for the roundup. But yes, most days it's just me." Sarah, who had been running ahead of them, called out excitedly. "Victor, is that your mare? The one that's going to foal?" They looked where she was pointing. In the shadows of a stand of cottonwoods, Victor's chestnut mare stood awkwardly, her sides heaving. "Yes, and it looks like she's chosen today," Victor said, quickening his pace. "Sarah, go back to the house and bring the kit from beside the barn door, the one with the red cloth tied to the handle." The girl raced off, clearly thrilled to be given such an important task. "Should I go with her?" Rose asked. Victor shook his head. "She knows the way, and I might need an extra hand here, even an injured one." As they approached the mare, Victor spoke softly, reassuring the animal with gentle words. The horse was clearly in the early stages of labor, restless and uncomfortable. "What can I do?" Rose asked, keeping her voice low. "Just stay close. Most times, horses manage fine on their own, but sometimes they need help." Victor ran his hands along the mare's flanks, checking her condition. She's young, and this is her first foal. That can complicate things. Rose nodded, watching with interest as Victor assessed the situation. Like with humans, she observed. You sound like you've had experience with birthing, Victor said. Some. In Minnesota, we were far from doctors. The women in our community attended births together. Rose stepped closer to the mare, murmuring soothingly when the animal snorted nervously. I assisted with several before my parents fell ill. Sarah returned with the kit, breathless from running. Victor took it with a nod of thanks and extracted several clean cloths, a knife, and a length of twine. Just in case, he explained to Rose. If all goes well, we won't need most of this. For the next hour, they waited as the mare's labor progressed. Victor explained each stage to Sarah, who watched with wide-eyed fascination. Rose asked occasional questions that revealed her medical knowledge, and Victor found himself explaining more technical aspects of equine birth than he'd initially intended. When the foal finally emerged, a gangly colt with a white star on his forehead, Sarah clapped her hands in delight. Victor quickly cleared the newborn's nostrils and mouth, then stepped back to let the mare tend to her offspring. He's beautiful, Rose said softly, watching as the colt struggled to stand on wobbly legs. Strong too, Victor agreed. He'll be running circles around his mother in no time. Sarah tugged at Rose's skirt. What should we name him, Rose? Victor said I could help choose. Rose smiled at her sister's excitement. What do you think would be fitting? The girl studied the foal seriously. Star, for his marking. Victor chuckled. Simple, but appropriate. Star it is. As they walked back to the cabin, Sarah skipping ahead with the empty kit, Rose fell into step beside Victor. Thank you for including her in that, she said. After everything that's happened, seeing her so happy is. She trailed off, emotion catching in her voice. She's a remarkable child, Victor said. You've raised her well. I've done my best, Rose replied. But she deserves more than I've been able to give her. Security. Stability. She glanced at Victor. A place to put down roots. Is that not what Helena offers? Rose was quiet for a moment. I thought it would be. Now I'm not so certain. Before Victor could ask what she meant, Sarah called for them to hurry, and the moment passed. But Victor found himself wondering about Rose's words for the rest of the day, and what they might mean for the future, both hers and, increasingly, his own. The letter from the Helena School Board arrived with Victor's supplies the following week. Rose's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal, and Victor busied himself unpacking provisions to give her privacy. Sarah, however, hovered anxiously at her sister's elbow. What does it say, Rose? Can we still go to Helena? Rose read silently, her expression revealing nothing until she folded the letter and looked up. The position has been filled, she said simply. They could not delay the start of term any longer. Sarah's face fell. What will we do now? We'll find another position, Rose said with forced confidence. Perhaps in Bozeman, or even here in Cottonwood Creek. Victor set down the sack of flour he'd been holding. You're welcome to stay here until you do, he offered. Winter's nearly upon us anyway. The roads will be difficult soon. That's very generous, Rose said carefully. But we've imposed on your hospitality long enough. It's not an imposition, Victor insisted. The truth is, the place feels more like a home with you both here. The admission surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise Rose. Later that evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, Rose approached Victor as he sat by the fire, mending a bridle. May I speak with you frankly? She asked, settling into the chair opposite his. Victor set aside his work. Of course. I am concerned about our situation, Rose began. We cannot continue to accept your charity indefinitely. Sarah and I need to establish our own lives, our own home. I understand that, Victor said. But there's no rush to leave, especially with winter coming. By spring, your arm will be fully healed, and you'll have had time to secure a new teaching position. Rose looked into the fire, her profile gilded by its light. When we first came here, I was determined that our stay would be brief. I saw you as merely a temporary savior, someone whose kindness I would acknowledge and then leave behind. She turned to face him. But something has changed. Victor's pulse quickened. What has changed? I have begun to see a future here, Rose admitted quietly. Not just on your ranch, but in this territory. Sarah is happier than I've seen her since our parents died. She follows you around like a second shadow, learning things I could never teach her. She's a quick study, Victor said, smiling at the thought of Sarah's endless questions. And I. Rose hesitated. I find myself reluctant to leave the life we've begun to build here. But I cannot expect you to support us indefinitely, nor can I compromise my independence or reputation by remaining in a bachelor's home without proper standing. Victor understood the dilemma. In the tight-knit communities of the West, reputations were easily damaged, especially for unmarried women. Rose was right to be concerned. What if you had proper standing? He asked, the words emerging before he'd fully considered them. Rose's eyes widened. I don't understand. Victor set aside the bridle and leaned forward. Rose, I won't pretend this is how I imagined it happening. But the truth is, these past weeks have awakened feelings in me that I thought died with my wife. You and Sarah have brought life back to this place, and to me. Victor, let me finish, he said gently. I'm not offering charity or a temporary solution. I'm offering partnership. Marriage, if you'll consider it. Rose stared at him, clearly stunned. Marriage? Victor, we barely know each other. We know enough, he countered. I know you're intelligent, determined, and fiercely protective of your sister. You know I'm honest, hardworking, and committed to this land. He reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. We could build something good here, the three of us. A real home. And if my feelings don't match yours? Rose asked quietly. Victor's heart sank, but he kept his voice steady. Then you're still welcome to stay until spring, with no obligations. I'll help you find positions elsewhere, if that's what you want. Rose was silent for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. I need time to consider this, she finally said. It's not a decision to make lightly, for Sarah's sake as well as my own. Of course, Victor agreed, releasing her hand. Take all the time you need. Rose stood, smoothing her skirt with her good hand. Thank you for your honesty, Victor, and for seeing us as more than burdens to be endured. You could never be burdens, Victor said softly. Not to me. After Rose had retired to the bedroom, Victor remained by the fire, his thoughts in turmoil. He hadn't planned to propose. Not so soon, not so awkwardly. But once spoken, the words felt right. The prospect of Rose and Sarah leaving in the spring had become increasingly painful to contemplate. Somehow, in the span of a few short weeks, they had become essential to his vision of the future. Whatever Rose decided, Victor realized, his life had already been transformed by their presence. He could never return to the solitary existence he'd carved out after Martha's death. Whether they stayed or left, his heart had reawakened to possibilities he'd thought forever closed to him. Rose's decision came 3 days later, after a snowstorm that blanketed the ranch in white. Victor had spent the morning clearing paths to the barn and checking on the livestock, returning to the cabin with frost in his beard and a load of firewood. He found Rose at the table, a sheet of paper before her, and Sarah nowhere in sight. Sarah's napping, Rose explained, seeing his questioning look. The excitement of the snow wore her out. Victor nodded, setting down the wood and removing his heavy coat. It's the first real storm of the season. There will be plenty more to excite her before winter's end. That's what I wanted to discuss with you, Rose said, indicating the chair across from her. Please sit. Victor complied, trying to read her expression. You've made a decision. I have. Rose folded her hands on the table. I've been considering your proposal from every angle. The practical benefits are obvious. Security for Sarah and me, a permanent home, the combining of our resources and skills. But marriage should be more than a practical arrangement, Victor said carefully. Yes, Rose agreed. And that's what has taken me these 3 days to resolve in my mind. She met his gaze directly. When I first regained consciousness in your home, I was suspicious of your motives. Men had already proven dangerous on our journey west. I remember, Victor said. But you have shown me, consistently, that there are still good men in this world. Men who help without expectation, who keep their word, who see women as equals rather than possessions. Rose's voice softened. You've been patient with my wariness, respectful of my independence, and kind beyond measure to Sarah. Hope began to rise in Victor's chest. Does this mean, it means, Rose continued, that while I may not speak of love as freely as some might expect, I have developed feelings for you that go beyond gratitude or friendship. Feelings that make the prospect of building a life with you seem not just practical, but desirable. Victor reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Rose Zimmerman, are you accepting my proposal? A smile bloomed across her face, transforming her serious features. Yes, Victor Miller I am. On one condition. Name it. That you understand I intend to be a true partner in this ranch, not merely a housekeeper or caretaker for Sarah. I want to contribute, to help build what you've started here. Victor laughed, relief and joy mingling in the sound. I would expect nothing less. Your intelligence and determination are among the qualities I most admire in you. Rose's smile widened. Then we are agreed. Victor stood, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet. When shall we be married? The circuit preacher won't be through until spring, but Judge Thornton in town could perform a civil ceremony. After Christmas, Rose suggested. It will give us time to prepare, and for my arm to heal completely. Her expression grew mischievous. And perhaps for you to court me properly, as I believe is customary before marriage. Victor chuckled. I suppose we have done things somewhat out of order. We have, Rose agreed. But then, nothing about our meeting has been conventional. Victor reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. May I kiss you, Rose? Or would that be too improper before our courtship has officially begun? In answer, Rose leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, briefly, chastely, but with a promise that made Victor's heart race. I believe we can make our own rules about propriety, she whispered, given the circumstances. Before Victor could respond, a small voice came from the doorway. Does this mean we're staying? Sarah stood there, her hair mussed from sleep, eyes wide with hope. Rose turned, extending her hand to her sister. Yes, Sarah, we're staying. The girl's whoop of delight echoed through the cabin as she launched herself at them both, nearly knocking Victor off balance as he caught her in his arms. Does this mean Victor will be my brother now? Sarah asked, looking between them. Not exactly, Rose said, exchanging a smile with Victor over the girl's head. He'll be your brother-in-law. Something like a father. Sarah considered this, her expression serious. I think I'd like that, she decided. He already teaches me things, like Papa used to. Victor felt his throat tighten with emotion. I'd be honored to be like a father to you, Sarah. Can I still help with the horses? And learn to ride properly? Rose said it wasn't ladylike, but I think she's wrong about that. Rose laughed, a sound of pure joy that Victor realized he'd rarely heard from her. I suppose some of my ideas about what's proper for young ladies might need to adapt to our new life. I think that's wise, Victor agreed, setting Sarah down. Ranch life requires different skills than city living. As Sarah peppered them with questions about the wedding, the future, and whether she could have a pony of her own, Victor caught Rose's gaze over her sister's head. The look they shared held understanding, promise, and a depth of feeling that needed no words. They would build their life together on this wild Montana land, forging a family from the broken pieces of their pasts. It would not always be easy. The territory was unforgiving, the work endless, the isolation challenging, but they would face it together, stronger for having found each other in the most unexpected of ways. Cottonwood Creek, Montana Territory, December 24th, 1871. Snow fell in soft, silent flakes as Victor stood before the small gathering in Judge Thornton's parlor. The room was warm, festooned with pine boughs and red ribbons for Christmas, the air fragrant with spice cider and wood smoke. He adjusted his collar nervously, unaccustomed to the formal suit he'd ordered from back east. Beside him stood Thomas Reynolds, his nearest neighbor and the closest thing to a friend he'd made since coming to Montana. Stop fidgeting, Thomas whispered. You look fine. I feel like I'm being strangled, Victor muttered, but he stopped tugging at his collar. The small group of guests, mostly neighbors and townspeople who had come to know Victor through his business dealings, turned as the door opened. Sarah entered first, resplendent in a new green dress, her hair arranged with ribbons that matched her outfit. She carried a small bouquet of winter greens and pine cones, beaming as she took her place opposite Victor. And then Rose appeared, and Victor forgot to breathe. She wore a dress of deep blue, simply cut but elegant, with a lace collar that emphasized the graceful line of her neck. Her dark hair was arranged in a coronet of braids, tiny white flowers tucked among the strands. The splint was gone from her arm, though she still moved it carefully. In her hands, she carried a bouquet matching Sarah's. As she walked toward him, Victor saw not just the woman who would be his wife, but the future they would build together, the family they would become, the seasons they would weather, the joys and sorrows they would share. In her steady gaze, he saw strength to match his own, and in her small smile, a promise of happiness he'd never expected to find again. When she reached his side, Victor took her hand. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "And you're uncomfortable," she returned with a twinkle in her eye. "But handsome nonetheless." Judge Thornton cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in matrimony." The ceremony was brief, the traditional words spoken with sincerity by both bride and groom. When Victor slipped the simple gold band onto Rose's finger, purchased during his last trip to town and hidden until this moment, he saw tears shimmer in her eyes. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Thornton declared. "Mr. Miller, you may kiss your bride." Victor hesitated only a moment before drawing Rose into a tender kiss, mindful of their audience, but unable to completely mask the depth of his feelings. When they parted, applause filled the small room, Sarah's excited clapping the loudest of all. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. Mrs. Thornton had prepared refreshments, and someone produced a fiddle for dancing. Victor, who had planned only the simplest of gatherings, was touched by the community's embrace of his new family. Later, as they prepared to depart for the ranch, they would spend their wedding night there. With Sarah staying in town with the Thorntons, Rose drew Victor aside. "I have something for you," she said, pressing a small package into his hands. "A wedding gift?" "But I didn't open it," Rose urged. Victor unwrapped the paper to find a pocket watch, silver and carefully polished. "It was my father's," Rose explained. "The only thing of value the robbers didn't take, because I kept it hidden in my boot." She touched the watch face gently. "I wanted you to have it, as a symbol of the time we'll share together." Victor was speechless, moved by the significance of the gift. "Rose, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll cherish our time together," she replied softly. "However long or short it may be." "I will," he promised, drawing her close. Every minute of every day. As they drove home through the snowy landscape, Rose nestled against Victor's side beneath the buffalo robes in the sleigh, their ranch house a distant light on the horizon. "Do you remember the day Sarah found you?" Rose asked, her voice hushed in the winter stillness. "How could I forget?" "Sir, she's too weak to beg," she said. Victor glanced down at his wife. "I looked into my barn and found the greatest treasure of my life." Rose smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "We found each other, all three of us." Ahead, the lights of the ranch grew brighter, windows glowing with welcome in the gathering dusk. Not just a house anymore, Victor realized, but a home, filled with voices and laughter, warmth and purpose, and a love that had come to him when he least expected it. As the snow continued to fall, covering the land in a blanket of white, Victor Miller drove toward his future with his bride beside him, his heart fuller than he'd ever believed possible again.